This is Blake Hall from ID.me. Raise your hand if you've heard of ID.me. Keep them up if you've used ID.me. That's what I'm talking about. All right. Okay, we're done. Okay. I get, almost a little choked up talking about Blake and the journey that we've been through together. I definitely want him to do all of the talking. Again, staying humble and what's going on here. I'll tell you a little bit about Blake. You see a lot of stuff in the program, but he's a decorated military veteran. He was Army ROTC at Vanderbilt. He did some extraordinary things in combat. He was like the most successful, hunter/killer of the bad guys in Iraq, to the point where our allies, except for Wyman, that we can talk about, that we know about, allies would insert people to watch how he operated and used all the different types of intelligence that he had to capture or kill the targets. He went to Harvard Business School, and instead of going to a McKinsey or a Goldman Sachs, or we had a lot of different opportunities to go do stuff and take down a pretty good paycheck, he had a burning desire to continue to help, serve, if you will. And I'm going to ask him to talk about the different pivots that the business has been through along the way. But kind of the first thing I would love to talk about is that kind of origin story. I always love to talk about is, what kind of inspired you to not go the way of the large paychecks and take the entrepreneurial path.
Thanks, Kelly. And I just want to say, Kelly's changed my life. Craig and Kelly are both wonderful mentors to early stage founders. And if it wasn't for Kelly, I would not be an entrepreneur today. So for all those founders who are in the room who've taken funding from Moonshots, one of the best decisions you've ever made along the way. And I think at one point actually pushed Dawn, your wife, down to number 2 in the most called number list, because I was calling him so frequently to make sure I didn't fuck it up.
True.
Yeah. So look, I think, when it comes to the origin story, purpose is so important. It's important to everyone in this room who's worn the uniform and has dedicated themselves to something greater. And when you leave the military, that sense of purpose, it's almost like you lose a limb and a part of yourself. Like, well, what's my place in the world now, and how do I find meaning? And I think, we're talking about leadership. For me, leadership is has a very simple definition. It means the ability to inspire other people. When you're marketing freedom as a product, as a leader, it's pretty easy to inspire folks because there are fundamental human rights that matter. It's how our Creator created us with free will. When I left the military, I was kind of spinning a little bit. I kind of glommed onto the rugby team to get a little bit of the camaraderie back at Harvard Business School that I had lost. But I knew that I wanted to dedicate myself to something greater. And so when I initially saw all these organizations struggling to reach out to the military community, and they were also having issues moving, FTC data shows that military families suffer from identity theft at twice the rate of the general population because our social security number is printed all over everything. And every time Veterans Day would come around, a veteran would get a free blooming onion at the Outback, they would show their social security number to a stranger to get a fried vegetable. And I was like, that's pretty fucked up. So, I was like, you know what? With what I learned through signal intelligence-based targeting over in Iraq, I'm like, there's been all these data breaches. The question and answer thing is out. Telecom networks are actually much more secure and reliable in terms of verifying that you're you. And maybe with the technical foundation the military gave me, I would be able to solve this problem for a community I loved. And I didn't realize it, but that problem that plagued the military community, turns out it's pretty hard to know who you're dealing with on the internet in general. And so as we kept pulling the thread down on it, it went down to the very core layer of the internet, which is how do we know that you are who you're claiming to be? But that was, it's the Robert Frost saying, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. That's the beautiful part of entrepreneurship is you start solving one problem and then you realize it might just be a symptom of something much greater.
That's awesome. We early on, you kind of drew out a flywheel, and a flywheel in a business model is where one piece of the engine of that flywheel feeds the other part of the engine, feeds the other, and then feeds that back in so that you start to get significant momentum. Can you describe a little bit so that people who may not know understand exactly what ID.me currently is and the flywheel that you've created?
Sure. So, I studied economics and American history at Vanderbilt, double major, and I'm very grateful for that education because it gave me a sense for how markets develop over time and the patterns. When history doesn't quite repeat itself, but it rhymes, to quote Ken Burns. And so when you look at how different markets develop, like when you look at how did Visa develop, where the banks kind of got together, and how do you have a credential that any community bank issues, and wherever you fly, even around the world now, you can transact with trust in seconds without using cash. And so how did that happen? How did our ATM networks develop, where they used to be proprietary networks, but now they all interoperate, and they've got back-end agreements to do revenue share? Even looking at like the automobile market, which is one of my favorite case studies, where Henry Ford, brilliant entrepreneur, Model T, assembly line, and that's where he went. He created this mass market for automobiles, but then this guy, Alfred Sloan at GM, came along and said, hey, Henry, not everybody wants a Model T. They want a pickup truck, and they want a sedan, and they want all these varied Jeeps and everything else, and GM kicked Ford's ass for 20 years because the market kind of creates in this monolith of the V1.0, one size fits all, but then it personalizes. And so when you look at identity through that lens, where the way that we frame it is your most trusted logins at your bank or your employer, they're not portable. Your most portable logins like Facebook and Google are not trusted. Digital apps are proliferating, government's bringing services online, healthcare is bringing services online, financial services are bringing services online, all require a lot of trust that you are who you're claiming to be. The fundamental thesis was that trend is not sustainable. That ultimately the path of most efficiency for consumers will win, and that is a digital wallet that does exactly what your physical wallet does. And so I'm an infantryman, left, right, or up the middle. Like, where can I use my military ID card? Go to Lowe's and I get 10% off. I can get physical access to a military installation with the same credential, authenticated differently. And I was like, that's how student IDs work too. You go to J.Crew with your student ID and then you get physical access to a dorm. Obviously the risk is way different. I think anyone who's a parent here knows that like J.Crew, they're getting a sale. They don't really care about the 15% off, but you do care about who gets access to a building that has your children sleeping inside of it. And so that's what we do today. We went to all these retailers that were trying to reach the same community and said, please don't make veterans upload their PB214 every single time they go to a new website. Just have them uploaded once with us. And then we went to the other retailers and said, look at these other folks. We're making verification a shared sport where you can take a variable cost and turn it into a fixed cost and amortize it. And once we had all these retailers now, including Apple, Samsung, all the major sports leagues, Luxottica, which is Oakley, Ray-Ban, everything else, we said, well, where else do military folks want to be? They want to be at the VA. And so we got all this like NIST credentialing that our product team needed to do. And when we walked into the VA, we were able to say 30% of all the active duty and veterans who are online already use ID.me. And so if you want to do single sign-on to verify that veterans are who they're claiming to be, by the way, when I left and got out of the military, you had to drive to a VA facility to prove who you were in person to upgrade your login. We brought that online, and so we won the VA, and that gave us an opportunity to innovate. And remember, the incumbents we compete against are Equifax, and Equifax sucks. Like we're not competing with Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, or Bezos types here. And so once we had an opportunity, which is what it's all about. Anyone who's in here is a competitor. Give me an opportunity to compete, and you will, grit is like, I will die before I quit, and like watch. And so, so that's where we created, new capabilities where I realized homeless veterans were very near and dear to my heart. And international veterans, and we realized you had to have credit history to prove you are online. The government doesn't share data. So we created a pathway where you can verify who you are through video chat. And one of the first gentlemen who verified with us in 2018 at the VA, 81-year-old veteran, lives in Tokyo, his wife had Alzheimer's. And when we verified him, he started to cry. And it was just one of those moments where this is, greatest generation stuff, and the opportunity to give back. That's what purpose is all about. And once we did that, not only did we sort of do well by doing good, but that's when Treasury and Social Security, and then during the pandemic, all the state workforce agencies were like, we're completely shut down. We need a way to reach people, to credential them, and credit bureaus aren't going to cut it because there's 45 million Americans who don't have credit history. And that's where we said, well, we've got that covered, plus we've now got this video chat option. So we have 106 million users. We verified 43 million Americans to the standards that are set by the United States Department of Commerce through NIST. It makes America the #1 leader in terms of verified and enrolled credentials ahead of any European country. Italy is #2 at 40 million. We just passed them. So America's #1, as we should be.
Let's go.
Yeah. And over 6 million of those 43 million are Americans who would have been left behind simply because they don't have credit history, which for a variety of reasons disproportionately discriminates against people of color and women who are more likely to change their name to move. And that's fucked up. So we're leveling the playing field. Our data shows that no matter how you verify, once you're verified, your usage and how you authenticate to other agencies is comparable to more affluent folks who verify in the self-serve method that's based on records. So we're literally leveling the playing field every time.
So the power of the network that Blake just described is we have some costs associated with the first time we create a credential for someone and identify and bind them to that credential. But there's still typically margin in there based on the contracts that you structured. But that now is usable on all the nodes.
That's right. So Visa at scale is a beautiful model because every time the card rides the rails, it just prints money. There's no marginal cost. And that's why it has 70% free cash flow and EBITDA margins. It's an unbelievable business. What our data shows, like at Apple and Chick-fil-A just did a survey on military veterans in San Diego. They're like 94% of the veterans we talk to are already IDB users. They're like, that's ridiculous. And we said, yeah. So every time it goes through a retailer, 50 cents, 50 cents, 50 cents, no marginal cost for 94% of our verifications. For legal identity, one of the reasons we ran into like comms issues and stuff, one, we were ambushed by a very big competitor, but also you're the DMV when you first start to credential people because nobody's got a digital driver's license. And that's what we are. We're a digital DMV and we're a wallet. Now we are about half and half your driver's license versus the wallet. So over the last 72 hours, actually 48 hours of tax season, 1.2 million Americans got access to IRS apps. Half of them had already been verified, and they just simply needed to log in and get access to what they needed to do. The other half we verified. If you've gone back last year, 90% would have been new that needed to actually credential. So we're turning identity verification into a login problem. When you turn it into a login problem, it has like 99.5% conversion rates, which dominates even the lowest level of like data broker, but also your cost basis falls away. So this is the network effect where like the more credentialed military or American legal identity or doctors and nurses and first responders you have, the more likely you are to win a network node, a business. And the more businesses you have, the more portable your ID card is to get you value. So it's more valuable to users. And this is classic network effects, whereas more network nodes and more users use the product itself has escaped velocity, and it's like a Visa, MasterCard, duopoly probably at scale, but right now it's just us.
So what interesting term that I've never seen in another business is ID.me has a negative user acquisition cost. Think about that, right? So the companies that he described, the brands that pay ID.me, i.e., Apple, Amazon, whoever it is, right? They pay Under Armour. They pay for verification that this person is a military member so they can get the X% discount. So in the checkout flow, somebody who wasn't like the Chick-fil-A, whatever, 5% that aren't, as they go through a checkout flow and they register with ID.me, ID.me gets a new customer and Chick-fil-A pays for it. So think about being the new CMO trying to come up with a, user acquisition strategy that has a negative cost to compete with the engine, the flywheel that they've already created. So congratulations on doing what very, very, very few companies are able to do. So this little thing called the pandemic occurred. The federal government decided to pay, unemployment, checks out to most of America, and those were delivered through the state unemployment agencies. And all hell ensued. Can you describe what transpired, the size of the problem that occurred, and what IDME did about it?
Yeah, sure. So, and I used my background in Iraq when I saw some of these trends. So we got a call from Florida first where they said, we really have a lot of folks that we think are legitimate, that data brokers flagged as fraudulent, and we also have a fraud problem. And they said, can you help? We said, yep. So we went down there. There were 50,000 users who had been flagged as fraud by data brokers like LexisNexis or Credit Bureau that is being used. When they sent all those users to us for verification, we immediately verified 14,000 of them and said, no, they actually are who they're claiming to be because we have capabilities to get rid of those false positives. But the others were fraud by and large. So, mass amount of fraud, but also 14,000 Americans who needed help who were stuck. Florida talked to Georgia. Georgia used us. And then this is 2020. And then all of a sudden, Arizona adopted us for all of their claims, so did California, and eventually the entire left side of the United States of America, because of the results we drove. Now, what we saw when we went live, our whole mission had been focused on access and bringing more folks into the digital economy, like folks who are homeless or live overseas or tribal users and so on. This is the first time, we met these NIST standards, which are also designed for security and to prevent identity theft. When we went live with California, my engineering team immediately called up and said, we're getting Yandex IPs, which are Russian-based telecom addresses all over the network, malicious DNS queries, which is basically like them mapping out your website. So we notified, the CIO of California and her security team and everything else that we saw that. NBC News has reported on this, but the week before we went live with Arizona, there were 570,400 new weekly pandemic unemployment assistance claims, which were for gig economy workers. So either every Uber and Lyft driver in the world lives in Arizona, or there was massive amounts of fraud. The week after we were introduced, it was 6,700. And there's a few reasons why, which I can circle back to in a moment. So in December, Arizona said, there's so much fraud in our intake, we're not confident in the claims that we're paying out for like March through October. Could you go ahead and screen the claims that we're paying on? About 262,000 claims. And for context, every 50,000 claims represents roughly $1 billion every 6 months. So we said, sure. Of the 260,000 plus claims they were paying on, only about 80,000 people even tried to verify their identity. We were immediately hit with 4 denial of service attacks from West Africa, which we fought off. 1.2 billion DNS queries in a day, mostly from Chinese territories, but from across the world. And we said, holy shit, we are the fraud for these organized crime rings that are literally mainlining our money out of the United States. And as they spread how they were performing these attacks, you had domestic crime rings, mostly drug trafficking organizations that began to perpetrate the same TTPs to defraud our government. So California had been shut down for 2 weeks because they were so overwhelmed with fraud. We enabled them to reopen. Same thing, like Arizona was closed. Obviously, it was really struggling. We kicked the fraud out of their network by and large. And now we got like the DA for Sacramento was like the thousands and thousands of daily identity theft victims that we saw before IDME. That's done because they're here now. Doesn't mean fraud's over. It's like water; they'll always flow and find ways to do scams and everything else. But the scalable stuff was gone. And so as we as we achieved those results and they talked, we got adopted by New York, by Texas, by Florida. These bot attacks moved. And essentially what happened is the Chinese military hacked the Equifax database. The Department of Justice indicted 4 Chinese military officers for performing that attack. So they have the personal information, and this is again from NBC News, of literally every American adult, because it's not just Equifax, it's all the other breaches, OPM and everything else they've been involved with. And what our policymakers did with this pandemic unemployment assistance program was like a name, date of birth, social, plus a pinky swear that you're a Lyft driver, and you could get $600-700 a week. And so APT 41, which is the economic warfare arm of the Chinese military, literally looked at that. All they do is aggregated identity theft, wire fraud, racketeering, all that stuff. They're like, oh my God, let's just wire up bots and just send the PII and automate the form fill. And that's what, when we went live with one larger state in the Northeast, they said, we know it's fraud not because we have any advanced fraud detection, but because the bot fills out the form end to end and files the whole claim in less than 60 seconds, which is obviously possible unless you're ChatGPT. So I did what I basically did is, in Iraq I had the fusion cell to support me and everything else, RealTime Intelligence. And I said, these fuckers are going to open source their intelligence. I'm going to have my fraud team inside of the Chinese speaking forums, inside of the Russian speaking forums, inside of the domestic credit card forums that all turn to white collar government benefits fraud. So we have real-time threat intelligence set up. We started to send threat tippers and threat write-ups to our states because the attacks morphed over time. Like the controls that we introduced stopped the technical attacks that like the Chinese military was running. But then they didn't stop. They switched to scams and social engineering folks. Then we had to roll into a machine learning model that we have an economics PhD built, flagged 14,000 cases. 13,996 were confirmed as scams. The 4 that we thought were false positives on further investigations were scams too. So it literally has like a 100% hit rate, where even if you're helping the attacker because they fooled you, we can detect that now. But eventually the Chinese military, we helped NBC News break that story. We stopped them at the front door. They went around and breached the states in the back door, and then they mainlined the PII, the personal information, into those states, and then extracted the funds directly. And so Mandy has reported at least 8 states, but we base the problem, the reason why we went public with it was no governor wants to own kind of what Governor Newsom did, said $20 billion. Like who wants to say you're the governor and on your watch you lost billions of dollars? So we talked to one southern state and they said, here's what's happening, and are you seeing claims numbers going up? And we're like, no. Send us the transaction IDs, and they did. And we're like, we don't have those in our system. And like, oh shit, they got hacked. The input that we sent over had been redirected to a malicious domain where they just mimicked our attack. And this is APT 41, this is Chinese military. And we said, have you told the FBI or anybody else? And they're like, no, we're just trying to handle it ourselves.
Right.
So we have these like 1980s COBOL developers going up literally against the Chinese military. And it was extremely, it's infuriating as an American because not only are we directly funding our arch enemy right now, who is ascendant, for every identity that they claim and commit fraud, that's an American who, if they need benefits and they need access to cash, they can't get it because literally APT 41 beat them to the punch. So NBC News has now reported there's like a $20 million figure is way, way higher than that. And that's why, as a soldier, I felt I could not stay silent about watching, all this go out. The DOLIG couldn't get access to the data. We had a bird's eye view to 27 states for these patterns, and also saw the fraud rings going across to hit Treasury, which we stopped in their tracks. Insane. I would put what we did during the pandemic, there are 7 states now on record crediting us with stopping $270 billion worth of fraud, and we verified millions of dollars.
So, normal technology CEO activity. Pretty amazing, unbelievable to watch in action as you literally, personally parsed, directed the team, and kind of like you said, rehashed what you were doing in Iraq to catch bad guys.
I wish I knew Lyman back then, because there were a few times I wanted to get up, fly to Lagos, and stop at that source.
So I have been on honored to constantly learn from you and watching you adapt your leadership style. Most founders can't take it from, startup in the garage through to multiple rounds of financing, moving through co-founders, senior team leaders, and engage and fully evolve and continue to learn. And I know you study leadership and read voraciously. From the standpoint of these founders that are out in the crowd as they're on their journeys to grow their businesses, words of advice and or leadership challenges that they're going to come across that you can give them a little bit of warning on.
Sure, and I'll try to be focused so it's memorable. And I'll start with Andy Dunn, the founder and CEO of Bonobos, is one of our early investors. And he told me early on, he goes, Blake, every time your company doubles, 25 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 250, and so on, it's going to break. What do you mean my company's going to break? What does that mean? And now, we went from 16 million in revenue to 130 million in revenue, 737% revenue growth in 3 years. I'm like, oh, I get it. Because there is so much that changes when you get to scale. And, on the leadership side, when it comes to communication, we used to do weekly town halls every Friday and talk to folks. But when you have 800 people, it's not actually the CEO and the C-suite who should be doing that. It's essentially the platoon leaders and the company commanders that you need to give them room to breathe and adjust your cadence where you kind of back off and do it more on a monthly or a quarterly cadence. And so there's the kind of that learning, or at a new level of scale, when you're the new guy, it's always uncomfortable. And as you learn, you're like, oh my God, it's so simple how to, but it's things where you're like, yeah, we've hit an inflection point where I need to give space to my leaders to have ownership and to have turf. And then on the management side, there's operating the machine versus installing the machine that needs to be operated. And as an example, all of our reporting to customers was about new identity verification. And I remember, going down and I was like, what are we sending to our customers? And, management is different from leadership. So leadership is to inspire. Management is about having control and, to quote Peter Drucker, measuring what matters, synthesizing that, and then monitoring progress and if your activity is actually making things better or worse. And so these reports that we're sending out, are all first-time verification. And I go, but aren't half the users already verified? We're not, unlike the data brokers, we only need to verify you once. And then the verification event at VA takes you across IRS and can check you into MGM and soon to win here in a month and everything else like a digital passport. And I was like, those users converted 99.5%. They convert in about 10 seconds. And so if the metrics that matter to our customers are how many folks are getting access, what's the percentage of good customers net of fraud that are getting access, how much time does it take them to verify, what's their experience, and then what's my price? Because as we verify more folks, we have no marginal cost. We actually lower our prices to pass those savings along to our customers. We haven't taken the time.
And make it impossible to compete.
And make it, it's game theory. So, right, make the marginal economics impossible for a new entrant where it's bye-bye. I already had to run on a pretty good incline on my treadmill. Yours is going to be straight up. So have fun with that. So it's, and that's where you start to realize who can actually see the full system of what we're trying to do. Who is a helper who can operate, and who's an owner who can bring structure and clarity. And the hardest thing, and the thing that I've honestly fucked up a bunch, is that I promoted people for doing a good job because I didn't realize that in hypergrowth, and I put them in a bad position where some of them failed because I didn't realize the company is actually growing faster than most people are. We basically turned from a company into, a battalion, halfway between a brigade with all of our contractors and everything else in a couple of years. Folks don't, even the best officers and enlisted, they don't grow at that rate. And so it's not a linear scale organization where the organization is kind of growing at 3 to 5%. And if they do a great job and they're stretching into the next role, you can promote them. Actually hanging on to your title in a hypergrowth organization is an exceptional achievement in and of itself, because to be the VP of a $60 million company is way different than being the VP of a $130 million company where you've got multiple layers underneath you. So I think what's actionable about this? Well, one, Anand Mehta, who's our chief people officer from Bridgewater, brought over this concept of stratum. And there's literally this guy, Herb, that we have. And it basically, and so folks get Herb if they're a VP or up now to like assess stratum. And it literally looks at the way you think. And so the executives who weren't able to scale, when I asked them what they were doing, they would just give me a list of stuff. And they couldn't tell me what was important. The executives who could scale would be like, here's all my stuff, but here's what matters. I'm going to ruthlessly prioritize my time over here. And if I do these things right, they influence that. And that's how it nets up to like profit, network transactions, which are our goals as a company. And I'm like, well, man, how do you know if somebody's brain works that way? It turns out there's this guy, Herb, who it's fluid versus crystallized intelligence. And when you get to stratum 5, which is about 0.12% of the population, and life is kind of math, right? So if you actually were to look at like who's in executive positions in different roles, and like when they're leading all these people, what's the percentage? This is actually screening to find those people who actually belong at that level. You're able to lead in a different way, where you can align on the outcomes that you want, and then the strategy and the tactics that nest up and drive that, they will go off and they will do that for you. When you get down to lower levels of stratum, it's more linear thinking. And they need a plan because they literally can't see what you can see as a higher level founder if you're a systems level thinker. And the research that actually was very empowering and cathartic for me was if you're 2 stratums apart, like if you're stratum 5 or 6, which is where my executive team is about half at, upgrading the rest, versus stratum 3, it's like screaming into the abyss. Because really it's so simple, it's like this, and this, and like all this stuff does that.
Come on, do it.
Yeah. But they, and so to use a military analogy, it's like smart rangers and strong rangers, right? Where it's like, move those rocks over there, and your strong rangers just like pick up rocks and they start to walk them over there. And your smart rangers like, there's a truck right there. So it's like, why don't we just throw the rocks in the truck and drive it? But the thing is, at different levels of scale, even some of your smart rangers turn into strong rangers. And they just can't see it anymore. And that's the Peter principle and everything else. But this is actually a scientific way to screen for it. And so if you want to be on our C-suite team now, you have to be stratum 5, which is a systems level leader. Because my philosophy of leadership is find folks who are worthy of trust, who are smarter than you at the domain that they manage, align them, and then get the hell out of their way. That's why I loved leading recon scouts and snipers. We're coming from the line, I'm like, guys, did we do this? And they're like, sir, we did that 3 days ago. I will be back in my office drinking coffee and thinking of other things that you've already done. So, and I just remember going back and I'm like, how can someone be worthy of leading a group of men like this? And I was like, well, I'm gonna have to bust my ass to earn it. And I think that's the most wonderful dynamic when you can have a team like that, and it is just really hard to do, because what you've got to do as a founder is, even as you're up leveling the team and recruiting and everything else, and Congress has questions and your competitors are ambushing you, you also have to wrap a tourniquet around the areas where you missed a hire and to hold the line, so to speak. And that's why that entrepreneurship can be a sexy thing nowadays. And my analogy is it looks like a merry-go-round, but really it's a centrifuge where it just becomes more and more demanding of efficiency. And so you have to hold the line while you also figure out who are the people I need that are going to be responsible and accountable owners for the turf they get. And once you have a way to screen for it, you just have to drive as hard as you can to get those people by your side, because ultimately, when you're at scale, your success will be the success of the people who report to you. And that honestly is the most important thing that you have to do as a founder, is to say, am I willing to be accountable for this person's performance? Because the board has one decision, that's to fire you or to keep you. And the other one is, would I work for this person if I was at an earlier stage in my career? And if the answer is ever no, you need to transition that out as fast as possible. The longer you wait, the more you're going to suffer. And the more the people who report to that leader who aren't getting what they need to realize their best potential, they're going to suffer too. And so your sphere of compassion has to be much broader than this one person where you got to have an uncomfortable conversation. It's got to be about the greater good and the utilitarian aspect of it.
Yeah. Earlier this month, IDME announced a Series D of 132 million. Didn't say it, but I know, right? It's on a 1.6 billion pre-money valuation. And the question that I always ask you after a finance is, so you're done fundraising?
Well,
This is for the other founders.
the one thing that Kelly did amazingly well early on when he was mentoring me as like a young buck was I'm like, Kelly, like, you know, they want to invest and like I like them, but I'm not sure if we need the money. And Kelly's like, Blake, hold on. Let me think about all the founders who had a reasonable term sheet and had cash presented to them that then later regretted taking that cash. And then there was just silence on the phone for like a minute. I was like, Kelly, are you there? He's like, yeah, I can't think of any of them. So I was like, got it. And, you know, that's the thing, like, the markets are crazy and the outcomes are binary. So we went from, in December of 21, both of our lead investors were like, we'll give you as much cash as you want at a $3.5 billion valuation. And I was like, awesome, but also I already have like over 100 million in the bank, and like I know my team's going to do a great job executing, you know, through tax season. We're going to add tens of millions of users, and all things being equal, why don't I just hold on and like raise in 6 months and raise like 300 to 500 million, and I might get like 5 billion, right? So I needed that what the Roman generals had when they were like kind of like all glory is fleeting. Someone whispering that in my ear, I should have been like, yes, give me $300 million and go. But I didn't do that, right? And you can't beat yourself up about that. You can only live life in one direction. So when the market started to collapse, the one thing that I did do well is I realized, you know what, my outcome's binary and so is it for my team. And I don't think this market is going to get better anytime soon. We haven't reached the floor. So I went in, I locked in an up round of 132 million in March is when we did the term sheet and we closed around over this summer. And now we have enough cash where we'll be profitable next year coming out of tax season with network effects. And if you look at our gross margins, literally doing this. So we'll be profitable for forever because the only ID that we issue into our wallet is legal ID. And now the board and everyone else you were so smart to do that. You just have to get over it. Like, you know, I fucked up, got it, single tier, gone. My outcome's binary. Give me the cash so I control my destiny. And that's rule number one of being a CEO, which Kelly also drilled into me. Never run out of cash. And if you can raise it on a $1.6 billion valuation, you know, rewind time and be like, wait. You're upset that you're having to raise 132 million on a 1.6 when you could have done 3.5. And I'm like, and honestly, now that the market's reset, our investors will be the dynamics much better. Because if we had raised the 3.5 and everyone's valuation got cut in half, earning that back and then 4Xing would have created weird pressure within the boardroom. So there's actually like a silver lining to it where everyone's incentives around the company are aligned and in harmony. And there's great value to that as well. But this guy always taught me like, get the cash while it's there, because if you wait too long and that share is gone when the music stops. And that was super scary. There were like 1,000 employees, you know, generating $100 million plus in revenue. If we had literally like waited too long, we could have been gone, you know. And now we control our own destiny and we'll be profitable. But even at scale, if you don't take care of cash first and make sure you've got a buffer, you could really be caught upside down.
All right, we're going to go into questions. I know some people have some questions for Blake, at least some of our founders better. Now you're on the hot seat.
You almost mentioned it, and what I was thinking is how does ChatGPT change what you're doing?
Well, I don't know that ChatGPT, because it's the neural, you know, language part of it. Maybe as it moves over to sort of the generative images where it can detect spoofing, there might be some advances there that we're looking at for like document authentication and to look at, we already have technology that does deep fakes and synthetics and masks that we use when you take a selfie. So it's not just matching your face to the photo ID, but it's using face authentication to actually verify that that's a genuine face. So that technology is incredibly important to what we do for obvious reasons. I think the neural net stuff for content marketing is remarkable. I mean, you can see productivity improvements of 90 to 95%, where if you get the prompts right, it can generate an article that then you're just editing versus writing from scratch. The challenge, though, is with a cybersecurity company, which we are, how do you do that without having sensitive information being put, into OpenAI, which is still an immature company itself, where like search prompts and stuff are visible to other users. So there's a very real security dynamic. So I think right now, lower level content that's more focused on like the discount side of what we do is probably fine. The more advanced stuff that might deal with proprietary data, we probably want to keep out of an external system until it's got the right cybersecurity credentials that we want to see.
He wasn't here for the Gretel pitch. I'll connect him to Ali.
Yeah. Yes.
What's the name of the tool that you were referring to that like assesses the leader's sort of strategic thinking or the herb?
His name is Herb, yeah. No, he's I turned it into a verb. I'm like, have they been heard yet? And, but the research and the academia and then the screening, it's called Stratum.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you think about, like Stratum 7 is like Elon Musk, right? Like what is he thinking about? He's thinking about making humans a multiplanetary species. So in terms of thinking at a systems level, like, and that's all he thinks about, and all of his activities are nested around like protecting humankind against AI, and like who operates kind of at that level? And that's why he's so inspirational and such an exceptional entrepreneur. He's literally playing at a level of systems level thinking that is way beyond what pretty much anyone else on the planet is doing, and he's got the skills to match. So it's just a great leveler. There's no way to prepare for the test. It looks at how your brain processes information, whether it's structured or not, and then how you nest your thought underneath it.
In the back.
Thank you for what you've shared, really strong. You might be Stratum 7, so well done. Or higher, go for an 8. But in this room of allies, what can we do for you? What do you need? How can this room of allies be this force of interest in your success and what you're missioning for the country? How can we help you get where your mission needs to be, velocity, relationships, whatever?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And it's all one team, right? Especially for equity holders and everything else. That's been my philosophy since we started. As when we send out our investor updates, we will almost always have an ask for our investor base, whether it's talent that we're trying to hire or specific pieces of content that we want our investor base to help promote. And honestly, right now, elevating and distributing content that with data dispels a lot of the things that these data brokers tried to ambush us with last year is the most helpful thing. Because it's really all about people and comms and brand perception to establish ourselves as the market leader that we are. And we're still fighting through a little bit of what the data brokers that we're disrupting are trying to do to basically slow us up with government affairs and comms because we don't have a product or business model response.
One more, last one, Sebastian.
Thanks a lot for sharing those stories. And as you move towards profitability, if I could ask you to take your long view and project yourself, in the deeper future, what's the type of project that you would like IDME to push forward once you're really in control of destiny, not worried about getting the basics?
Sure. If we don't get up there with the FANG, and I know they all changed their name, but I just use FANG for now. So FANG-E, I will be beside myself because identity is literally the fabric of trust in our society. It underpins every transaction. From like leaving your kids at home with a nanny for the first time. Everyone knows, getting a warm introduction to a girl is better than walking up cold at the bar and like everything else, but like credit history and everything else, identity underpins everything. The key to winning identity, and when I looked at Visa, Visa was the largest IPO in American history for a long time. It's now third, I think. Aramco and like Alibaba were bigger, but still number 3 after decades. Visa's just 2 ID cards, credit and debit. But legal identity that's backed by the government is actually underneath payments. Like when a cashier doesn't trust your credit card, they ask to see your ID, they need your government-backed ID. Whoever wins the top of the pyramid for identity at the government wins the entire thing. Check in to MGM and Marriott and to Wynn, opening up bank accounts and proving who you are through your customer procedures, checking into a healthcare clinic, signing a document, notarizing a document to close a mortgage, open a loan, verified income. If you win legal identity, it is very easy for users to add other credentials, like we credential doctors, because once we know you're you, we're like, what's your state medical license? What's your DEA number? What's your NPI? Now we know it's a doctor, and so 15% of all the doctors in the country uses for e-prescription every day. So our vision is for a wallet that literally has every single ID card that your physical wallet does, and a lot more that would never fit into your wallet, and to make it everywhere that you want to be, from ordering a cocktail poolside at MGM without having to bring anything with you to the pool, and worrying about your wallet getting swiped, to accessing your government. And if we do that, we can be several orders of magnitude bigger than Visa, and that's what we want to do. We want to be the identity layer of the internet.
Mic drop. Thank you, Blake.